Good morning, everyone. Jim Fitzpatrick. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Building an empire is one thing, but preserving it through generations is an entirely different challenge. Today, we are getting an up close and personal look into one of America's most iconic family businesses, Anheuser-Busch. Billy Busch, heir to the beer empire, has written a book titled Family Reins, The Extraordinary Rise and Epic Fall of an American Dynasty. He really gives readers an insider's look into what took place to start the business and run the business, and then, of course, to sell the business later on. So, Billy, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Pleasure being on with you, Jim.
Sure. So kind of take us back for those people that are wondering, how did Anheuser-Busch begin? And talk to us a little bit about the beginning and how it got started.
Sure. My great-grandfather immigrated from Germany to St. Louis, Missouri, here in the United States, back in the 1800s, around 1859, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
And he got over here and he wanted to live the American dream. He had a lot of relatives and a lot of friends over in Germany that were actually immigrating to America at the time. And it just made sense. He grew up on the Rhine River over there, where there was a lot of industry and business going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it made sense for him to come and work along the Mississippi River here in St. Louis and be part of the industry that goes on along the river.
Sure.
As you know, the rivers back then were really the main source of transportation. Yeah. And so working along the rivers made perfect sense to him since he came from that background in Germany. So he got started, and he was first a river. He worked on the river as a salesman. What he was selling for sure, I think it was actually brewing equipment. And he ended up meeting his future father-in-law, Everhard Anheuser. And once he was married to his daughter, to Everhard's daughter, Lily, he was given the opportunity to take over the brewery, the E. Everhard Anheuser Brewery there in St. Louis, because it was a failing business, and they thought that he had such skill that he could take the brewery over and make something of it.
Wow.
And of course, the rest is history.
Yeah, no question about it. So readers learn about your childhood in the book, and you had a pet elephant, if I recall, right? Talk to us about what it's like to have a pet elephant as a kid.
You know, it was amazing growing up on Grant's farm. It was a farm that my grandfather, August Busch Sr., purchased back in the turn of the 20th century. He loved it because of the aesthetics of the farm. It's beautiful rolling hills. You know, it's got the woods and the tree lines and
Sure.
the farmland that he loved. And it's right outside the city of St. Louis. So it wasn't that long of a drive for him back then. Of course, he went by horse and buggy from his home at the brewery right on the river out to the countryside. It took him about 4 hours to get there, but he purchased the land. It was about 400 acres at the time.
Okay.
And he also loved it because it was also part of Ulysses S. Grant's history.
Wow.
President and General Ulysses S. Grant.
Sure.
And that's why it's called Grant's Farm today.
Okay.
And so he grew up there, and then his son, my father, August Busch Jr., better known as Gussie, took it over.
Okay.
And he opened up Grant's Farm in 1954 to the public, really to advertise the products.
Sure.
You know, like Budweiser.
Sure.
And he opened it up to the public, and he started getting animals to the place so that people could enjoy the animals. And we had an elephant when I was a kid growing up named Tessie. And Tessie was an incredible, you know, what they say about elephants, they have great memories, but
Sure.
they're also very emotional, and you grow very attached to them, and they
Sure.
grow attached to you also.
Sure.
So growing up with Tessie, she became like my best friend as a kid.
Right, right. And now you still have Grant's Farm today, right?
Well, it's still in the family. I'm not a part of it any longer, but my brothers and sisters own it.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in a different direction. I started a brewery out at our farm, my immediate family's place, and we opened up a portion of our farm to the public. So similar to what we had at Grant's Farm, we've got animals out there. We brew beer there, which we didn't at Grant's Farm, but we're continuing the brewing tradition of brewing beer. It's a beautiful farm. People come out and enjoy. They can relax. They can see the animals. They can drink some great beer and eat some wonderful food. And we're continuing that hospitality that I grew up with in the family.
That's great. That's great. Now, there's a lot of people that are watching today on our networks that own businesses and own companies of all different sizes. You talk about succession struggles in the company among your siblings and relatives and what have you. How did the Busch family approach succession planning and transition of leadership?
Well, I think first and foremost, whoever was going to take over the brewery, and of course it went through 6 Busch leaders, 5 generations. Whoever was going to take over the brewery had to know what they were doing. They had to be well informed. They had to have experience. They had to know each facet of what went on in the brewing, of what goes on in the brewing business, and be very well equipped and ready to take it over. And that happened with, of course, my great-grandfather handing it to his son, August Sr., my grandfather. And then, of course, my grandfather handed it to his oldest son, which was my uncle Adolphus, and he took it over, mainly not because my father wasn't well versed in running the company, but because he was older. Adolphus was older. So he had the opportunity to take it over. Well, when he passed away, the natural succession came to my dad, so it crossed over to this to my dad, his brother, and he ran the brewery from 1946 to about 1975. That's when things got a little bit more difficult in the succession in 1975, and I talk about it in the book. That his son, my oldest brother, who was my half brother, he ended up pretty much taking the business from my father, because my father was going through some very difficult times, and I talk about the death of my little sister that really was very, very difficult for my father. The divorce from my mother, and some of the other things that were tragically going on then. And so August the 3rd took the company over, and he ran it. And then, what made it really different from the other succession stories is that he handed it to his son, and his son had an addiction problem and might not have been the best person to hand it to. And that was pretty much the beginning of the end of Anheuser-Busch in the Busch family, because an outside company called InBev from Belgium and Brazil saw a way to take the company over, which they ended up doing back in 2008.
Wow. That was a big move. How did you feel about that when that took place?
I had mixed emotions, Jim. I got to tell you. Of course, I hated to see it leave the family, because I always felt such a huge part of the company. Because I grew up on Grant's Farm, where we entertained the public. I worked there at Grant's Farm. Did the elephant shows. I also was in the distribution side of the business. Had a distributorship in Houston, Texas, and down in Homestead, Florida. And so I was very, very involved with Anheuser-Busch for all those years. And it was in my blood, watching my father as a kid growing up, watching him run the brewery and what it took, and the willpower and the innovation and how hard he worked. It was just hard to see it leave the family's hands, because we all had such pride in the company. But at the same time, I knew that it was not in the best hands, because of the problem that my nephew had with his addiction. And so I knew that if it stayed in the family, there was a really good chance that the stock, the price of the stock, and the company itself could go downhill. And so seeing it go to an outside source at that time, also, it was 2008 when everything was going downhill. And AB was lumbering around $48 a share. When they came in and bought it, they bought it for $70 a share, and it really made the stockholders rich,
Yeah.
at that time. So,
Yeah.
so that was a nice thing to see happen.
Sure.
But it leaving the family was very difficult, I
Oh,
will say.
I bet. Having gone through that, what advice would you give for families out there that are balancing relationships with business decisions and succession planning?
I would say when you're passing a company down, I would say make it very black and white
Yeah.
so that you can't leave any gray area in there because you know how lawyers love to get involved and you don't want to have to go to court and get into fights and pay
Sure.
lawyers and you can lose the business doing that. And not only that causes a lot of bad press. So make it very black and white, give it to the pass it down to the next generation, but to the one who is most responsible and the most equipped to take it over and knows the most about it. And then that's the way I would go about it. But also you got to know when to pass it down and not have the ego to say you want to stay, you want to be the CEO, you want to be the president, you want to call the shots, and when
Yeah.
you're really no longer young enough or able to do so in
Sure.
at 100% level.
Right. 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 You guys survived Prohibition, which is remarkable in and of itself. Can you share what the family, how the family kept businesses going? I think you also kept all of your employees intact during those very challenging times.
Yeah, it was a tough time, and it was interesting because my father, he kept all of his notes, all of the letters that he had written, all the letters that were written to him from his mother, from his father, from
Wow.
even his grandfather Adolphus. He even had letters that he had sent to his mistresses, and the mistresses had sent to him. My dad was
That's a book in and
he
of
was he was a
itself.
pretty wild guy,
Yeah.
but it's in the book. I talked somewhat about it.
Sure.
But my father talked about how hard his father had to work and how hard he and his brother had to work through that 13 years of prohibition when you couldn't sell alcohol in the United States,
Wow.
and how innovative they became. And they started making all kinds of other products that really helped sustain the company
Hmm.
and keep them going through that 13 years. And like you said, they were able to keep all 2,000 plus employees employed
Wow.
during the 13 years of prohibition through their innovation of coming up with near beer, which is a non-alcoholic beer, and soda and syrup, and several other types of brands that helped them sustain
Sure.
themselves through that time. It was quite remarkable how they did it, but they stuck together and they worked very, very hard to get it done. And then, of course, when Prohibition was over, uh, a gift that my father and his brother Adolphus gave to my grandfather was the Clydesdale hitch. And the Clydesdale hitch they
Wow.
presented to my grandfather in 1933 to mark the end of Prohibition. And of course, they used that hitch to deliver the first case of Budweiser to the White House, to Franklin Roosevelt, who was the one responsible for ending Prohibition.
Yeah.
So it was quite remarkable, and everybody knows the Clydesdale 8-horse hitch is such a great marketing
Oh, there's no
tool
question
that
about it.
Anheuser-Busch has used forever.
Yeah, no question about it. I'd probably be remiss, and my subscribers would kill me if I didn't ask this question. But what's your take on the Bud Light uh, situation that we saw happen here in the last couple of years with its
Yeah,
marketing?
but Anheuser-Busch, during the time that the family owned it or the family ran it, it was a public company, but for a long, long time, ever since the end of Prohibition, it became a public company. But
Hmm.
uh, during the time that the family owned it, it was some of the best marketing that's ever
Oh, no
been
question.
made. I mean,
Yeah,
schools, colleges were teaching in their marketing
yeah,
classes how great Anheuser-Busch's marketing campaigns have been.
that's right.
And then, but they knew their audience. Our family knew who to market to. They knew the audience very, very well. And you get these guys that come over from other countries, and take over businesses that we have here in America that don't know the audience
Sure.
like we did all those years.
Yeah.
I think it makes it a little bit more challenging for outside companies to come in and expect that you're going to continue that great marketing.
Yeah.
So they didn't know their audience. They messed up. There's no doubt about it. I'm sure they regret it because a Bud Light sales are way down. That used to be the number one beer
I know.
in the world.
I know.
It's dropped down to maybe third or fourth at this time.
Mm.
So they've lost a lot of beer volume over that, and a lot of respect, I guess, for the Bud Light brand.
Sure, sure. And now they're teaching that in schools, right? The goof there on the marketing with that. It's a whole new lesson that I think marketers can take away. Right?
That's for sure.
Yeah, there's no question about it. So you had a reality show on MTV, the Busch Family Brood, which is pretty cool to open up your family like that to everyone to see how it functions and as a family and organization. Talk to us about that. That's a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, I got a bunch of hams as kids, and so when we went to them, and we had been asked several times on several occasions if we would do a reality show. My wife and I, Christy and I, if we would do a reality show, and at that point our kids were too young, and we said no. And then it really became we were offered the ability to do a reality show again later on, and it seemed like a great time to do it. We talked to the family, and all the kids were like, "Sure, let's do it. That would be fun."
Yeah.
So we got together with the production company, and we did the reality show. Had a great time. It brought us all together, because a lot of the kids were in college, and some of them were out of college by then too, and some of them were thinking about getting married. And it was just a good time to do it. It worked out for us, and we had a lot of fun with it. And we had that one season. It was during COVID when it came out.
Yeah.
And I think, I honestly think that, that might have hurt season 2 a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe, because we were in Hollywood, maybe our political stance didn't help us very much either, if you want to know the truth about getting season 2. But that's
yeah, it's a whole nother
showbiz, right?
Right. What would you like the biggest or the greatest lesson for the readers to take away from your family's story?
Jim, that's a really good question. I think that the greatest lesson is that business success, the challenges that go along with business can really be difficult sometime, and very difficult on a family.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing is to have your priorities right. Never let the business become more important than your family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Family should be the most important thing. I always look at it as God, family, country.
Yeah.
And those 3 things are the most important things to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I want that to be the most important things to my kids, so that my kids always stick together. Unfortunately, it wasn't like that in the Busch family.
Yeah.
There was a lot of falling out that went on because of the difficult times, because of the success. I will say that's a part of it too.
Sure.
But I think it's very, very important that you have your priorities straight and keep family and relationships ahead of your business.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned in the book that your father kind of treated you and your siblings almost like employees of the company, and that can be tough, right?
Well, it's tough, but we had a great time with Dad, and it was fun because there was so much success, and people loved coming to Grant's Farm. And our job as kids growing up was to maintain Grant's Farm and keep it beautiful for the public. And we represented Budweiser and the company, and it was so important to us. And so there was a lot of pride in it. But at the same time, we were treated kind of like employees or soldiers, and we couldn't really show emotion. There wasn't that didn't happen. So it's kind of like a John Wayne atmosphere, in a John Wayne movie, where you're tough and you just got to do, what you're told, and that was it.
Sure.
And if you didn't, not only would you hear it from your father and your mother, but you'd also hear it from the employees that you worked with. And so it was you had to be tough, and you had to swallow a lot of emotional stuff. And so sometimes, what Christy and I are trying to teach our kids, or how we try to be with our kids, is to be a little more personable with them
Yeah.
and personal with them, and
Sure. Sure. Yeah, that's
let them
interesting.
express themselves a little better.
When you were a kid growing up in the midst of all of this, were you aware of who you were and how big of a brand and an iconic brand that this was in the country and in the world for that matter? I mean, were you aware that you were part of that empire?
I knew that something big was going on,
Yeah.
but I didn't really understand it. I never felt different than anybody else. I guess growing up on the farm kept me very grounded.
Yeah.
You know, my job was to get out and work next to the farm hands out there on the farm, and work hard, and not just work as hard as them, but actually work harder because of the last name.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, growing up on the farm, didn't make us arrogant or feel like we were ever better than anybody else.
Yeah.
That it really kept me grounded anyway.
Sure, no question about it. Billy Busch, heir to the iconic Anheuser-Busch legacy and founder of the Busch Family Brewing and Distilling Company. Thank you so much for all the time you've given us here at the show. We very much appreciate it. We're showing the book right now on the screen for those of you that want a phenomenal read. That is going to be a real page turner for you. We're going to make a link right below this interview that you're watching so you can get your copy of it. I highly recommend the book. It's awesome. Whether you have a family business or not, the story is an amazing one. So, Billy, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Very much appreciate it.
Really appreciate it, Jim. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.